My name is Eliana, 30 years old, living and working in Dallas. That morning, I stood in the main lobby of a high-rise building, the place my mother and stepfather called home. But they didn't know. I was the one who had just bought the entire building they called their nest. My mother dropped to her knees, begging me not to evict her from the apartment, while my stepfather just stood there, speechless. I didn't say a word. I turned to security and gave a simple nod. Have you ever been treated by your own parent like something that could be traded for money, for favors, or even a car? Have you ever been erased from your family as if you never existed? If you've ever been hurt by your own flesh and blood, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever felt invisible. And don't forget to subscribe, because the story I'm about to tell is everything they never wanted anyone to know. I grew up in a house where there were more mirrors than family photos, where the hum of a beauty machine in my mother's bedroom was more familiar than my grandmother's lullabies. My mother, Kala, was addicted to cosmetic procedures and credit cards, as if tighter skin, a younger face, and perfect features could erase the cracks in her life. And Steve, my stepfather, was a car dealer who wore tight polo shirts year-round, always smelled like cigarettes and whiskey, and whose hands could turn into fists the second someone disagreed with him. I don't remember exactly when I started taking over the chores for my mother. Maybe it was around age 7 when I knew how to fold Blake's clothes into neat stacks like the ones in commercials. Blake was Steve's son from a previous marriage. My mother always called him my little brother, but in that house, I was nothing more than his unpaid babysitter. Blake had everything: brand new bikes, imported toys, and custom breakfasts. I had rags, buckets, and looks that turned away whenever I winced from cramps or fever. I used to think that if I worked just a bit harder, behaved just a bit better, maybe my mother would stop for a moment, look at me, and say, "Well done, Eliana." But the only things she cared about were whether her credit card was maxed out and whether Steve was happy with how I served dinner. On my 13th birthday, I made myself a sandwich, took a candle from the kitchen drawer, and lit it. I didn't hope for anything grand, just a hug or a birthday wish. But that evening, Steve came home with an odd grin. He tossed me a tight red dress. "Put this on, quick, we've got company." I'd never worn anything that tight. I felt completely exposed. But my mother looked genuinely pleased. "You look like a real woman now," she said, brushing my hair behind my ear. I saw Steve's eyes glance over me, briefly, but cold enough to send chills down my spine. That night's guest was Mr. Sam Griffith, over 50, bald, but trying to hide it with heavy hair gel. He arrived in a glossy black Chevrolet Impala. I sat quietly across from him at the table, trying to pick up salad with my left hand to hide the bruise on my right arm. Dinner ended with my mother saying, "He's very fond of you, Eliana. He could send you to school far away. Broaden your mind. It's a good opportunity." I didn't understand it at first, but 3 days later, I was woken up at 6 a.m. My mother shoved a worn-out suitcase into my arms with only 3 outfits, a notebook, and a tube of toothpaste inside. "You'll be staying with Mr. Sam for a while. He has a house in Florida. Be obedient. Don't cause trouble. Everything will be fine." "What about school? What about Blake? Mom?" I didn't finish. She turned away. "Don't bother me this early. Go. Steve will drive you to the bus station." I was sent off like a parcel. No goodbyes, no instructions for safety, no hug. Sam picked me up at the station with a blank smile and the car he had just traded for me. I sat in the back seat, clutching my suitcase, trying not to breathe too loudly. His place was a beachside condo that reeked of mildew and aftershave. He didn't allow me to use a phone. Every day I cleaned, did laundry, cooked, scrubbed the floors, and was forbidden from asking questions. Whenever I made a mistake, he growled, "I didn't pay to feed you for nothing." One evening, while I was washing dishes, he came up behind me. "Growing up fast," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. I couldn't move, partly from fear, but mostly because in that instant, I finally understood what I had only ever heard people say on TV. That sometimes people aren't hurt by force, but by being abandoned by those who were supposed to protect them. I didn't tell anyone what happened in that house for 2 years. When I was finally sent back to Dallas, my hair was chopped short from a panic-filled night, my skin burned from the sun and cleaning chemicals, and my eyes always stayed down as if trained to. My mother glanced at me when I walked in. "You're too skinny. What have you been eating?" "Never mind. Help me set up for Blake's birthday." No one asked how I'd been. No one asked if I was okay. No one even explained why I had been sent away. To them, I was just free labor to be shuffled around as needed, a hand-me-down without warranty, and no one cared what condition I came back in. I never spoke of what happened in Florida. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, if I behaved, maybe the nightmare would fade. But silence didn't ease the pain. It just made people think I was weak and easy to control. They were wrong. I came back to Dallas on a quiet autumn afternoon. The bus dropped me across from the old neighborhood, the place I once called home, where I had repainted the white fence myself at 9. I dragged my little beat-up suitcase across the windless street, holding a paper bag filled with the things Sam had thrown back at me. My right shoulder still throbbed from a fresh scrape. No one was waiting. The front door was ajar. The TV was playing. My mother laughed loudly in the living room. She looked at me for maybe 3 seconds. "You're back? Put your stuff in the garage. Blake's room just got renovated. I don't want clutter." I said nothing. I set the suitcase down and looked down the narrow hallway. Everything was familiar, but didn't feel like mine. When I pulled out my birth certificate from the old envelope Sam had kept locked in his safe, I realized why my mother hadn't been surprised to see me. The paper that once said Eliana Ruth Sanders, Sanders being my biological father's surname, had been replaced with a new one, Eliana Marie Griffith, Steve's last name, all traces of my real father erased. I asked her directly, "Why did you change my name?" She didn't even turn around. Makes paperwork easier. Who's Sanders? A loser who didn't even send child support. I turned and went to the garage, now my so-called bedroom. A deflated rubber mattress against a concrete wall, a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and a cigarette-stained blanket. Every morning I had to wake up before 5 a.m. to clean the kitchen, make breakfast for Blake, and prepare coffee for Steve. I knew if I was late, there'd be consequences. Steve liked to throw things to make a point. Once it was hot coffee on my calf, another time the TV remote straight to my knee. I tried getting a job at a diner down the street, washing dishes during the night shift. The owner, Mr. Harris, was the only one who asked, "Still in school?" I nodded. "Trying to graduate early, I'll work hard." He nodded. "Good. But you'll need valid ID." I went home to dig through documents and discovered my ID was no longer valid. All my financial records, school files had been changed. My legal guardians, now listed as Carla Griffith, mother, and Stephen Griffith, legal guardian. The savings account my real father opened when I was 4, which had almost $4,000, emptied. The new beneficiary? Blake. I stood frozen at the bank for hours. The clerk said, "I'm sorry, this account was transferred to a new owner 2 years ago by the listed guardian." I had no assets, no legal identity, no room I could call my own, just a damp corner in a garage and a secondhand alarm clock from a thrift store to remind me each morning that I was still alive. I paid my tuition by working, saving every cent of tip money from the diner. Some nights I had to walk home for nearly an hour because I couldn't afford to put air in my bike tires. I ate old peanut butter sandwiches and drank tap water. Each month I hid a little money in my worn-out sneakers tucked under the garage floorboard, away from Steve's eyes. One night after my shift, I came home to find Steve in the kitchen, holding a beer. He looked me up and down. "Where's the tip money?" I stepped back. "I need it for tuition next week." He laughed. "You live in my house, eat my food, use my water, and you think you're keeping your own money?" I didn't have time to react before he suddenly stood up, grabbed my bag, and dumped everything out onto the table. A $20 bill, a small notebook, a few graded papers, and a sealed envelope fell out. I snatched the envelope and hid it behind my back, but he had already seen it. "Give it here," he growled. I shook my head. "No." The air went still. The beer bottle in his hand was still half full. I heard the sound of glass hitting the edge of the cabinet. Then everything shattered. He shoved me against the wall, his hand clamping down on my shoulder. "You dare say no to me, you little brat?" I broke free, grabbed a fruit knife to defend myself, never intending to use it. That's when my mother walked in. She saw the scene, heard my ragged breathing, and saw the knife in my hand. But she didn't ask why. She said just one thing. She's mentally unstable, always imagining people are out to get her. I was handcuffed that very night. A neighbor had called the police after hearing the commotion. When I tried to explain to the officers that I had been attacked, my mother stepped forward and said firmly, "She has a history of violence. I'm worried for my son's safety." I was taken to a juvenile detention center. They took my fingerprints, ran blood tests, and stripped me of everything I had. I was held for 3 days. No one visited, no one called. I slept on a steel bed with a mattress hard as concrete, listening to the soft sobs of the girl in the bunk next to mine and wondering, if I die, would anyone even notice? On the 3rd day, a staff member opened my cell door and said, "You're being released. Your mother declined to take you back. You'll be transferred to the Youth Homelessness Support Office." I walked out wearing the same clothes I'd been arrested in and carrying a plastic bag with a few personal items. As the back door shut behind me, I didn't look back, because by then I understood one thing too well. People can call you family and still erase you from their lives as if you never existed. The small diner on 14th Street was where I worked every night from 6 p.m. until almost midnight. I wore a faded uniform, an apron with frayed corners, and canvas shoes that soaked through every time it rained. It was the only place willing to hire me when I had no proper ID, no guardian, no place to go home to. I did dishes, wiped tables, served food, whatever it took to keep the job and earn enough for my next meal. Lorraine Patterson came in on a Wednesday evening when the place wasn't too busy. She sat alone in the back corner under an old yellow light. She wore a wine-colored sweater, her silver hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, a bracelet of dark wooden beads on her wrist. She ordered something simple, potato soup and a cup of mint tea. But her eyes weren't simple. They looked straight through the shell I had been hiding behind for years. "What's your name?" she asked when I brought her tea. "Eliana," I replied, bowing slightly. She nodded gently, asking nothing more. But when I returned to clear her dishes, I saw a small cream envelope on the table, folded carefully. No name, no return address, just one line written in fine, clear handwriting. "If no one hears you, write until they can't ignore you." I looked around, but she was already gone. I tucked the envelope into my apron pocket, went home, and read it again and again through the night. I didn't know why she wrote to me. I'd never told anyone my story. But maybe she saw something in my eyes, something I'd never had the courage to say out loud. I borrowed the diner's computer during break. On a free blogging site, I created an anonymous account. No profile photo, no last name, just one description, recording the things no one wants to hear. My first post was only a few lines. I was once traded for a used car. My mother called it a fresh start. I called it the first loss I couldn't put into words. I didn't know who would read it. I didn't think anyone would care. But that night, I slept soundly. No nightmares. No jolting awake with a hand on my bruised shoulder. The next day, I kept writing. About Blake, about the garage room, about the cold cup of instant noodles I had on my 16th birthday. About the look in Steve's eyes whenever I dropped a dish. About my mother, who once looked me dead in the face and said, "If it weren't for me, you'd be dead on the street by now." I wasn't writing to complain. I was writing to remember. Because I knew too well what it felt like to be forgotten, twisted, retold in someone else's version. I had been the violent girl in reports, even though I'd only held a knife to stop another beating. I had been the unstable one, just for daring to fight back. Writing was the only way I could reclaim the voice they had tried to silence. A week later, my fourth post received a comment from an anonymous account. My mom once locked me in the bathroom for 3 days. I thought I was the only one called a burden. Thank you for writing. I cried in front of the screen, silently. Just a single tear rolling down my cheek and landing on the keyboard. Not because I pitied myself, but because someone saw me. Without demanding, I pretend to be okay. From then on, I wrote every night. Each post was a slice of memory, a shard of truth I had once tried to bury. I wrote about the night I was abandoned at a hospital with a swollen wrist and no one came to pick me up. About being locked out in the rain for coming home 10 minutes late. About the way my mother said, "You don't deserve a last name." I never used my real name. I called myself Ruth. It was an old middle name my mother had crossed off my birth certificate like it never existed. That name became my armor, my shield for all I wanted to protect in silence. One piece took me 3 hours to write, my hands trembling nonstop. Getting hit hurts, but the worst pain is when someone sees you bleeding and still turns away. The worst pain is having to bandage yourself in the dark, then make coffee the next morning, like the night never happened. After that post, someone sent an anonymous email. "I'm a retired social worker. If you need help, I can guide you on how to reapply for proper documents. I've worked with many similar cases. Don't give up." I read every word slowly, my chest trembling. Not from fear, but from hope, something I thought I'd lost long ago. I didn't reply to the email, but I saved it, because writing didn't just help me survive, it gave me a path forward. And it all started with a small envelope from a woman I only met once, a stranger who handed me the first key to unlock a door I thought would stay sealed forever. I was wiping down tables at the end of my shift when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email. The subject line read, "We want to hear more of your story." The sender, Rise Forward Foundation. I froze in the tiny kitchen, the sound of frying pans and gas burners fading behind me, eyes locked on the dim screen. The message was short, but enough to make my heart pound. "We found your blog through a series of recovery forums. Some of our members shared your writing privately. If you're willing, we'd like to invite you to apply for our scholarship program for women who've experienced harm in family systems." I read it over and over again, unable to believe it. Every sentence felt like someone had cracked open a window in the world I thought I'd been trapped in forever. I never imagined my quiet, tear-soaked journal entries could reach anyone, let alone open a real door. That night, I sat in the diner's break room, borrowing the manager's old laptop to finish the application. When I got to the line that asked for my intended major, I hesitated for a few minutes, then typed slowly. Real estate management. I didn't explain why. I just knew I wanted to understand land, housing, ownership. I wanted to learn how to build not just a home, but a place no one could ever take from me again. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. A warm female voice introduced herself as Lisa Hammond, scholarship director at Rise Forward. "We've reviewed your application," she said, paused and added softly, "and we're honored to offer you a full scholarship to the University of Texas in the field you chose. If you accept, the semester begins this fall." I sat down on the back step behind the diner, my back pressed against the rough brick wall. My hand clutched the phone. I couldn't respond right away, not because I doubted it, but because I had never imagined good news could arrive for me so clearly. Lisa waited. I heard my own voice, trembling but steady. "Yes, I accept." 3 months later, I walked into the lecture hall at the University of Texas with an old backpack, a borrowed laptop, and a pair of nearly worn-out running shoes. But I walked in using my real name, with legal documents reinstated thanks to the legal team at Rise Forward and a full 4-year scholarship. During the freshman orientation, someone asked me why I chose real estate as my major. I just smiled and said, "I want to learn how to hold on to what others tried to take from me." Throughout those 4 years, I never stopped working and studying. I served as a teaching assistant for an elderly professor in the department. In the afternoons, I worked part-time at a local real estate brokerage office. The owner, Rachel Morgan, was sharp and demanding, but after a few months of watching me catch the bus at 8 a.m. and stand drafting documents late into the night without a single complaint, she finally asked, "Eliana, are you really going to stick with this industry, or is this just a temporary step?" I looked at her. "I'm serious about it. I want to understand how to turn abandoned places into strong homes." She nodded, saying nothing else, but from that day on, she began assigning me small contracts, taking me along to property inspections, teaching me how to read lot maps and ask the right questions to prospective buyers. I soaked it all in. Every rundown house, every red ink mark on zoning maps fascinated me more than any textbook. I graduated with honors. At the commencement ceremony, surrounded by a sea of navy blue gowns and the constant clicks of cameras, I stood on stage to receive my diploma, my real name boldly printed on it. Eliana Ruth Bennett. I spotted Miss Lisa from afar, giving me a small wave and a warm smile. I didn't see my mother. I didn't expect her either. She had never shown up for a single first day of school, and I doubted she'd attend the day I stepped out of her shadow. Right after graduation, I received an offer from a real estate investment firm based in Houston. They found me through an essay I had published on the Rise Voices blog, a piece about reclaiming identity through land and people. During the interview, the HR director asked, "Why should we believe that a girl who once experienced homelessness can manage millions of dollars in fixed assets?" I looked him straight in the eye, because I know what a roof over your head is worth, not just on paper, but in the heart of the person living under it. He didn't respond. But a week later, I received the official offer, along with a 3-year contract. I moved to Houston. The first apartment I rented wasn't large, but it was filled with light, and the hardwood floors didn't creak underfoot. I bought a small bookshelf and placed it by the window. On it, I displayed a framed quote from Ms. Lorraine's letter years ago. "If no one hears you, write until they can't ignore you." Next to it sat a photo from graduation. Just me in the frame, but my face glowed as if hundreds were standing behind me. I had lived my childhood as a shadow, a crossed-out name, someone no one ever called by the right name. Now, every time I signed a new contract, I didn't just sign in ink. I signed with everything I had endured to finally be recognized as myself. One afternoon, while working in my small office at the Houston investment firm, I looked out the sun-drenched window toward the parking lot. That day, while reviewing a list of bank-foreclosed properties in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, my eyes froze on a familiar address, 1094 West Elkhart Avenue. A 3-story apartment complex, built in the early 80s space, beige paint faded, dark shingles sagging, the place my mother and Steve once called a fresh start after selling the old house. I didn't immediately recognize it, but when I opened the photo file, it hit me like a punch to the chest. The dim hallway with wooden railings, the back iron staircase leading to the 3rd floor, and that dusty balcony cluttered with fake plants. I had stood there at 16, clutching a bag of leftover food from the restaurant, waiting for the doorbell to ring. I had once slept on a mat in the downstairs hallway when my mother locked me out for coming home late and embarrassing the family. That building was now on the bank's liquidation list after the previous owner defaulted during the financial crisis. According to records, over a third of the units were vacant, the plumbing needed repairs, and the elevator was out of compliance. The market value was around $1.8 million, but the bank was eager to offload it for far less. I took a deep breath, my hand hovered over the mouse, motionless. "Something special?" Madison, the colleague at the next desk, asked when she noticed my silence. I just shook my head. "Just an old address, somewhere I used to live." I said nothing more. I sent a legal verification request to our appraisal team. 2 weeks later, I received the full report. Everything checked out, clean paperwork, no disputes. Most importantly, the property was not privately owned, but held by the bank, meaning a buyer could remain anonymous through a third-party entity. I forwarded the file to my private attorney, asking him to handle the acquisition through my firm in Houston, Ruth & Co. Holdings, which I had founded a year earlier. No one knew I was Eliana. The documents only showed the signature of my authorized representative, Mr. Marcus Klein. an attorney who had handled clients far wealthier than me. I gave only one instruction: no contact with any current tenants until the transaction was complete. While the contract was pending, I occasionally checked the community listing site for recent photos. One day, I saw a post from a tenant on the second floor. "Anyone know what happened to the Griffiths in the corner unit on the third floor? Haven't seen them in weeks. Lights are always on, but no one comes or goes." I froze. My mother and Steve were still living there. The final signing took place in a quiet conference room with only me, the lawyer, and the bank's representative. As the pen touched the paper, I didn't feel triumph, just something still, something solemn, like closing the door on a room that had remained ajar too long in my heart. "So the property officially belongs to Ruth & Co. starting today," Marcus said, packing the documents into his briefcase. I nodded. "Thank you." I told no one in the office, shared nothing with colleagues in Houston. This wasn't a win to celebrate. It was a return, but not for justice or revenge. I had no interest in making them hurt like they once made me. I just wanted to finally stand in a place where I could say, "I no longer belong to what you tried to trap me in." A month later, Marcus confirmed everything had been finalized, the deed updated in the ownership records. I asked him to send an official notice to all residents announcing new ownership and management transition within 4 weeks. I also requested a review of all lease agreements, especially the unit occupied by my mother and Steve. A few days later, Marcus called back, his voice a bit hesitant. "Eliana, I just looked at the lease for Unit 3C. It's listed under Stephen Griffith, but there's no paperwork proving any valid tenancy. Looks like they've been staying under a verbal agreement with the former owner." I sat silently for a moment. What does that mean? It means they have no legal right to remain unless the new owner agrees to let them stay. I looked out the window, where the wind rustled through the dark green trees. I wasn't happy. I wasn't angry either. It just felt like things were finally settling into the place they were always meant to be. "Proceed by the book," I said. "Give them 7 days to produce a valid lease. If not, send the 21-day notice as required." Marcus paused briefly. "Understood." I set the phone down. On my desk, beside a cold cup of coffee, was a printout from my old blog. An illustration of a small house in the middle of an open field. Below it, I had written, "Some places you must leave in order to truly return." I had returned, not with a cry, but with a transfer deed and a notarized stamp bearing my name. That Monday morning, the property management office had just opened for 10 minutes when the receptionist called me. Her voice was tense. "Miss Eliana, there's a man here demanding to see the building's owner. He won't leave without speaking to someone in charge." I asked, "What's his name?" She hesitated, then said, "Stephen Griffith," accompanied by a middle-aged woman who says she's his wife. They're both rather agitated. I put the pen down. Inside, there was no turmoil, only the feeling of wind brushing across skin long scarred. I stepped out of my private office and walked along the stone-tiled hallway, each step firm, each one carrying something I'd never had before. Standing. The small lounge was filled with early morning light. Steve stood with his back to the window, both hands braced on the table. Carla sat beside him, eyes darting around the room. As I pushed open the door, they both turned. Steve squinted at me for a moment, then growled, "I'm here to see the person in charge, not the receptionist." I didn't respond right away. I walked forward and gently laid the stack of transfer documents on the table in front of him. The seals were clear, the handwriting of attorney Marcus unmistakable. "I'm the one in charge," I said, my voice steady like I was reciting the elevator maintenance schedule. Steve stared at me. Carla exhaled sharply. "No, it can't be. Eliana," she stammered. I nodded. "Yes, it's me." Steve scoffed, but there was unease beneath the smirk. "What the hell are you doing here? Secretary for someone? Don't pretend this is serious business." I looked straight into his eyes. "I'm not a secretary. I'm the new owner of this building. All previous leases are under review, including Unit 3C, the one you're living in." The air froze for 3 seconds. Then Steve slammed his hand on the table. You've got to be kidding. We've lived in that unit for almost 8 years. The old landlord never gave us trouble. The previous landlord went bankrupt, and he had no legal right to continue renting without proper documentation, something you benefited from. Now, everything must follow regulation. If you can't prove your right to stay, I'll be forced to issue a formal eviction notice. Carla jumped up. You can't do this. You're my daughter. You don't have the right to throw your own mother out on the street like a dog. I raised my chin, no longer trembling. You told me I wasn't your daughter a long time ago, remember? When you signed the form declaring me unfit and undeserving of care, you chose Steve over protecting me. I'm only doing what you taught me. Law is law. Steve laughed, a twisted sound like something catching in his throat. You think you're better than us now? Just because you've got some money, you think you can play queen? People like you? I cut him off, not loud, but every word clear. You traded me for a Chevrolet. Now I've bought the place you live in, using just 3 months' profit from a small project. Erla couldn't look at me. Her gaze dropped, fingers twisting like she was grasping for something to hold. Eliana, I didn't think you would. Calling me Eliana is already too late, I replied, eyes fixed on the face that haunted my teenage nightmares. I don't need someone to say my name. I need someone who respects it. Steve stepped around toward me, likely trying to intimidate the way he used to, but I didn't step back. He stopped when he saw I wasn't flinching, my eyes steady. You'll never erase the past, he said, voice dry. I nodded slightly. True, but I can put it where it belongs, behind me. No one said another word. I leaned down, gathered the documents, and gave my final directive like a project coordinator. The office will send a residency verification notice within 3 days. If unmet, a formal eviction will follow. I'd prefer not to involve law enforcement, but I will if necessary. I believe both of you are quite familiar with how the system works. Carla opened her mouth to say something, but all that came out was a soft, resigned sigh. Then she quietly followed Steve out of the room. I stood there for a while, sunlight slanting through the large window. The tabletop still bore the smudged mark of Steve's hand, damp with sweat and rage. I wiped it away gently, as if clearing dust from my own memory, not to erase it, just to make sure it never dirtied my hands again. The next morning, just as I unlocked the management office, the receptionist handed me a light gray envelope. No sender name, just a clear cursive inscription. Eliana Ruth Bennett. I paused. That handwriting was unmistakable. I didn't open it right away. I held the letter in my hand as I walked slowly back to my office, closed the door, and pulled the blinds. With only the desk lamp and the soft hum of the HVAC system around me, I sat down, ran my finger along the envelope edge, and peeled it open. Inside was a white sheet, folded in thirds, the black ink steady and precise. No embellishment, no lengthy opening, just words, honest, direct, and squeezing something deep in my chest. Eliana? I don't know where to begin. I probably should have said this years ago, when there was still time to repair some of it. But back then, I was scared. I was a coward. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the page. Even as a child, I saw how Mom treated you. I remember how you skipped breakfast so I could have seconds. I remember you scrubbing floors under the midday sun, your hands blistered and no one offering water. I saw it all, but I did nothing. Because I was afraid if I spoke up, she'd turn her back on me like she did on you. When I was 18, I found the letter you wrote to your birth father, hidden behind an old book on the shelf. I read it so many times I memorized every period. I knew you weren't lying. I knew you weren't crazy. I knew Steve couldn't be trusted. I knew Mom had made the wrong choice, and I chose silence. I paused. My hand trembled slightly as I flipped the page. The paper still crisp, but the words felt like they had been waiting for years to be written. Oh, I haven't lived in Dallas since I turned 18. I left without telling anyone. I changed my name, got new papers, lived away from Mom, from Steve. I never spoke of you to anyone until I read that anonymous blog. I knew immediately. The phrasing, the memories. It had to be you. I was the one who submitted the anonymous testimony to Rise Forward Foundation. I signed your full name, included detailed accounts of what you went through, and attached a copy of your medical report I found in Steve's drawer, the one noting the cracked shoulder blade when you were 14, that they claimed was a fall down the stairs. I didn't sign my name. I wasn't brave enough. But I wanted you to have a chance. You deserved to live under your own name. I couldn't keep reading just then. I set the letter down and buried my face in my hands. Not out of anger, not out of regret, but because something inside me cracked. Something long buried. The feeling of being truly seen. Not out of pity, but solidarity. I never thought Blake remembered who I was. I never imagined he had been quietly watching, quietly haunted. To me, he was always the boy with separate meals and movie nights while I scrubbed the kitchen. I thought he was part of the darkness. But now I understood. He too was a victim, just one who had been forgiven more easily, held closer by adults who never held me. I picked the letter back up and read the closing lines. You don't have to forgive me. I don't expect it. I just want you to know. Someone saw you, believed you, and stood with you, even in silence. Does everyone want to talk? Here's a new email I created. I'll understand if you never write back. But if someday you just want someone who'll listen without judgment, I'm still here. I folded the letter carefully, like touching something fragile. I placed it in the drawer beside my old fountain pen, the one I use for signing the most important contracts. I didn't cry out of hurt. I cried because someone, even late, chose to stand on the side of truth. No one can change the past, but sometimes all it takes is one person, just one, to not look away. And I allowed myself to believe in that, not with logic, but with my whole heart. I don't know how the article got picked up or who first sent the link to the press, but on a Friday morning, as I was in a project meeting about renovating the ground floor unit, my phone buzzed over and over in my pocket. At first, I ignored it, but when the fifth call came from a landline in New York, I stepped out into the hallway and answered. We're reporters from Modern Resilience magazine. The woman's voice was calm and clear on the other end. We've read your entire blog. What you've shared is a rare and vivid form of memoir. We'd like to verify a few details and, with your permission, publish an in-depth piece on your journey to reclaim identity and personhood after being cast out by your own family. I was silent for nearly 10 seconds, not out of doubt, but because those words, cast out by your own family, struck a chord I hadn't expected. Like someone had finally named a wound that had ached quietly for years. I agreed, not for praise, but because I understood the weight of having a true story told in the light, rather than buried in silence. 2 weeks later, a nearly 7,000-word article appeared on the front page of the Survivor's Voice section. The headline wasn't dramatic, wasn't pitiful, just simple. The girl named Ruth, reborn from forgotten records. They didn't use my mother's name, or Steve's, but they included enough details that anyone who had lived on the same block, worked in the same field, or ever heard the name Griffith family would recognize them. The journalist interviewed Marcus, the attorney representing Rise Forward, and even obtained a copy of the medical report Steve once hid. Every line I'd written in my blog had been verified, cross-referenced, and published without embellishment or omission. No sugarcoating, no avoidance. Just one day after the article was released, I received nearly 300 emails. Half were from strangers. Women across the country who had survived family abuse, been rejected, or had their right to simply exist taken from them. They wrote to thank me, to share their stories, to say they were also trying to step out of the dark. One message came from a woman named Marjorie, 74 years old, a retired social worker from Missouri. She wrote, I've been retired for 10 years, but if anyone ever asks me why I chose that job, I'll show them the article about you. I read each letter, every line, every sentence, not to feel important, but to remind myself that silence is no longer the only option. 3 days later, the press turned toward the people connected to the story. I said nothing more. But I heard Carla had been dismissed from her position managing a dental clinic chain after the article went viral. A former coworker of mine messaged me. They didn't fire her because of the scandal. They fired her because she never once apologized. With Steve, things got louder. A string of properties he had transferred to other names was reinvestigated. The IRS got involved after discovering suspicious cash transactions tied to unregistered car sales through intermediaries. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt peace. One early spring afternoon, I received an invitation from a women's organization called United She Rises, headquartered in Chicago. They were holding an annual conference on recovery from family trauma and wanted me to speak during the final panel. I hesitated. I could write in the shadows, but speaking with my real voice in front of hundreds, that was something I'd never imagined having the courage to do. Called back the next morning, I accepted. The conference took place on a cloudy day. Inside the hall, the lights were soft, the rows of chairs extended calmly, no pressure, no noise. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped onto the stage with a small, folded piece of paper in hand, my fingers cold. But when I looked down and saw the eyes of the women gazing up at me, I realized I no longer needed the script. I held the mic, my voice was a little husky, but steady. I was once sold, I said slowly, not on the black market, but in my own home. For the price of a cheap car. No one gasped, no one whispered, just a quiet, attentive silence. I'm not naming names today, not because I'm afraid, but because this story isn't about them. It's about me, about what I lost and what I chose to reclaim. My name, my right to exist without needing permission. I raised my head and looked straight into the first row. I am not a commodity. And I never was. Then I stepped back from the podium. The applause wasn't wild or impulsive. It was steady, clear, warm. A confirmation. I had been heard. I had been believed. No longer overridden. No longer erased from my own story. And that, to me, was enough. I now live on the top floor of the very building they once assumed would always be theirs. The apartment is moderately sized, lined with warm oak floors, large windows facing west, where the evening sun casts soft gold onto the walls. I don't fill the space with expensive furniture or display pieces, only things that hold meaning to me. A framed photo, a model car, a moss green armchair where I wrote hundreds of blog entries. The photo rests on a pine bookshelf near the window. In it are me and Miss Lorraine Patterson, the woman who once left a cream-colored envelope with a handwritten note that said, "If no one hears you, write until they can't ignore you." The photo was taken the day I graduated, when I invited her to the honorary scholarship ceremony. She sat in a wheelchair, her eyes clouded, but her smile just as bright as the first afternoon I met her at that little diner. Beneath the photo sits a silver 1982 Chevrolet Impala model. I placed it there as a reminder. I was once traded for that very car, but from that transaction, I bought back the entire building. And more than that, I reclaimed my name, my truth, my life. Every morning I brew coffee by hand, no machine. I pour it into a brown ceramic mug and sit by the window, watching the sunlight slowly creep across the balcony rail. I still work with Rise Forward as a content advisor, still write my blog, now followed by over 1 million people, but I no longer write just to release pain. I write to record what I've learned, that not everyone is born into love, but everyone has the right to rebuild meaning into their own life. One day, I opened an old brown leather notebook from my desk drawer. It had followed me through the earliest blog days, filled with sticky notes, clipped receipts, handwritten letters from survivors across the country. On the last page, I had written a short passage, the script looser, softer now. I don't need their apology. I need them to know I was never broken. I was reborn. I looked up at the ceiling, not to pray, but to feel the stillness it had taken me nearly 20 years to find. In that silence, there were no footsteps coming to corner me, no one screaming my name in anger, no sobs for myself like in that freezing garage years ago. Only the soft wind whispering through the cracks and a quiet knowing. I hadn't built this place for them to return to, but for myself. One brick at a time for a future of my own. In the afternoon, I stepped onto the balcony to water the lavender I'd planted by hand last year. The flowers were blooming soft purple, their scent gentle like memories that no longer needed to be held. Far below, a few children ran across the courtyard. A mother carried her baby, walking slowly. They didn't know who I was. But I knew. I was helping build a place where no one had to be traded just to exist. In the kitchen corner, I kept a small wooden box. Inside were my earliest tuition receipts, a letter of gratitude from the scholarship organization that had reignited my hope, a copy of the building's deed stamped by the lawyer, and one unopened envelope. My mother's last letter, sent after the article ran with just 3 words on the front. Are you well? I've never opened it, not out of fear, but because I don't need to. I've already answered that question, by living each day fully, by holding memories without letting them consume me, by turning pain into the foundation of something stronger than any apology could ever offer. I don't know how long I'll live in this apartment, maybe a few years, maybe the rest of my life. But I know this, every brick here isn't just stone or cement or wood and glass. It's proof of a truth that can't be erased. I came back, not to take justice from anyone, but to build a life worthy of my own hands. What do you think of my story? Have you ever been the one forced into silence amid things no one wanted to hear? Have you ever felt like the place called family was the very thing that made you feel most alone? If you have, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story, because sometimes it only takes one person brave enough to speak to open a path for many others to find their own voice. If this story touched something in your heart, please hit like and follow the channel. Every week, I'll continue sharing real slices of life about those who've been forgotten, the shadows that hide in families, and the long road we walk to reclaim our worth. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you in the next story.